broadcasting sector in Australia is one of the best in the world. It's recognised internationally. There are 460 licensed community broadcasters in Australia, most of which are radio services. There are some television services there in the capital cities, but it's mainly sort of radio stations dotted all around the nation. Lots of them in areas like Sydney and Melbourne, and plus tons of stations all around the country in remote and regional areas. The national radio audience reach is 5 million people per week. Stations provide news, information, cultural content, pretty much everything you can get in an audio format, and all of it catered to meet a diverse community of interest. Community broadcasting services provide a diverse range of viewpoints, promote the identities of local communities and contribute to social inclusion, provide opportunities for participation in free-to-air public broadcasting, and that's because the majority of presenters on community broadcasting stations, probably about 97%, do so on a voluntary basis. They contribute to media diversity, as we're one of the third media sectors in Australia, beyond the commercial sector and the public sector, which is made up of ABC and SBS, and we generate a high level of local content, as well as providing a unique range of services and programs. Our organisation, CBAA, is essentially an executive body and a member organisation for community broadcasting stations. We champion community broadcasting by building stations' capability and creating a healthy environment for the community broadcasting sector to thrive. We are a cultural organisation established for the promotion of community broadcasting, and we are created to give a voice to those not otherwise heard on air, such as the ethnic audience, Indigenous and other minority groups. Pretty much any sort of community of interest that we might have here in this country of ours can be represented by either the programs or stations that are involved in community broadcasting. So the CBAA, our organisation, this is just a list of some of the services that we offer to help stations build their capability. First one is the Australian Music Radio Airplay Project. I'll just cherry pick a couple from this list here. It's a great service because it allows a connection point for contemporary Australian musicians to have their music played on community broadcasting stations. That's a targeted service, so if you're a country musician, for instance, they'll be able to say, okay, we can send your music out to stations that just play country music as opposed to an individual trying to find all these community radio stations themselves and just send out a whole bunch of CDs. There's things like the Digital Radio Project. Digital radio is a sort of newish way for listeners to be able to access their favourite radio stations, and it's very similar sort of from your traditional analog audio broadcast, and it's just got some sort of extra functions in it, sort of like the song bubble show up on your screen. Much like digital television, it's sort of saying that the digital broadcast will supersede the analog broadcast. There's no cut-off date inside. That's just something that's probably going to happen because that's just the way of the world. Other things on there is there's the Junior Solicitor Program and Dispute Resolution Initiative, which is services that we offer to community broadcasting stations who want to need legal advice or there might be internal conflict. There are organisations, which is a thing that happens because there's so many passionate individuals involved with community broadcasting every now and then, some of them butt heads. The content distribution hub mentioned there in the Digital Delivery Network, that is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week satellite service, as well as digital service, that emanates from our premises down in Redfern. And what that is program makers from all around Australia. The program sends their programs, and we will in turn send it out to stations via satellite so they can be rebroadcast to stations beyond their community of interest. We've also got some live programming on there. Country music is very popular in Australia, and every morning from 6 to 9 we have one of the flagship country music programs, Good Morning Country. Hands up if there's any country music listeners here. Good choice. The CBAA has 270 member stations broadcasting across Australia, provide a voice for communities that aren't adequately serviced by other broadcasting sectors. Now, some of these include Indigenous Australians, ethnic communities, educational services, which is what 2SEO is essentially classified as, religious communities, print disabled communities. Now this is a very important one because print disabled doesn't necessarily mean people who are blind or have difficulty with their sight. It can also mean people who have difficulty reading, and these are very important services because they have programs such as the Talking Newspaper, where local newspapers as well as national newspapers are read out live on air. But a lot of tradies listen to that as well, because they're too busy on the road to be able to read a paper. Music, arts and cultural services, and youth and seniors committees. Australia is an ageing population, and more where licensing stations, or the CBAA licensing stations, who are there to serve a specific community of interest, being the ageing population. It's generally classified as 55 plus. I don't know if there's definitions changes, people will live longer, but a very, very important sector. Community broadcasters are governed by the Community Radio Broadcasting Codes of Practice. Now these are just sort of rules to ensure that what stations are doing on air are in alignment with the guiding principles of community broadcasting. Those being the 6 guiding principles united community broadcasters are: will promote harmony and diversity and contribute to an inclusive, cohesive and culturally diverse Australian community. Pursue the principles of democracy, access and equity, especially for people on issues not adequately represented in other media. Enhance the diversity of programming choices available to the public. Demonstrate independence in programming as well as editorial and management decisions. Support and develop local arts and music. Increase community involvement in broadcasting. Now, these are all really important principles for the sector to have. We're living through a very interesting time in media at the moment. I'm sure you're all sort of seeing the news, and the Liberal government is saying that the ABC and Fairfax newspapers have declared a jihad on the government. Of course, in the lead up to Tony Abbott being elected, the News Corporation papers, particularly the Daily Telegraph here in Sydney, were very vocal in their support for Tony Abbott. So it's sort of now more than ever, media diversity is a really, really important thing. And community broadcasting is one of those things that strives for that diversity. Not only do we sort of through the guiding principles of pursuing those principles of democracy, but ensuring that the voices that are heard on community broadcasting are ones that are reflected by all facets of Australian society. I think if people were to look at Australia from overseas, they might sort of think that we all look like the cast of Home and Away, when that's entirely not true. Our nation is incredibly diverse and amazing for it, and community broadcasting is there in an attempt to try and reflect that. The legal obligations in regards to community broadcasting and the Broadcasting Services Act. Community broadcasters need to provide their services and have to operate them and not make a profit. This is a really important thing. Community stations, obviously, they do try their best to make money, to keep their services viable, but they're sort of not in the business of being there as money-making machines. They are there to represent their community of interest when they are licensed by the government regulatory authority, the Australian Communications and Media Authority. They're there to serve a specific community of interest. For instance, there is a station in Melbourne, it's the only one in Australia, it's called Joy 94.9. And it is there as a service primarily for gay and lesbian or LGBTIQ communities. It is a really awesome station. A good friend of mine recently took over as general manager of that station. They provide a fantastic service. They've linked up with 2SER in the past to do live broadcasts of the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, and it's not just in conjunction with 2SER, it's also the newspaper here, Sydney Star Observer. So it's fantastic that all these stations are there and they are obligated to serve their local community of interest that they were formed to serve in the first place. Encourage community access and participation in all aspects of the station. That means that the people who are there involved in the station, generally doing so on a volunteer basis, are there, they are members of that local community, and just hope that they have the best interests of that community at heart in all of their activities there at the station. only broadcast sponsorship announcements rather than advertising. This is a very important point of difference for community broadcasting. Certainly for the listener, the difference between sponsorship and what you'd be advertising on a commercial station is not that big a difference, but from the back end, the businesses and organisations that are promoting their products and services on community broadcasting are doing so in a way where it's not just there strictly to make a profit, they're there to strengthen their local community. That is as simple as sort of like in rural and regional areas, the local RSL club will often not take out sponsorship on the local community station because that is a relationship that's not just there to turn a profit, that's one that makes both of those organisations stronger and in turn makes the local community stronger. Referred to a couple of times to the regulatory authority, the Australian Communications and Media Association Authority. Probably should get there later on. They have the Broadcasting Services Act. The key responsibilities of the ACMA promote the system where broadcasters take responsibility for making sure they meet their licence conditions, make sure that electronic media maintain community standards, manage spectrum allocation. Now, spectrum allocation is a thing sort of where the radio waves that are buzzing through the air from the transmitter towers to your radios and whatnot, all of this frequency spectrum allocation is allocated to specific things. I think we're sort of, I need a technical person who will be able to take a whole other hour out of your life here this evening to go through all this stuff. This includes things like machinery in hospitals, access frequency spectrum in mobile phones. All of these devices access that, and the regulatory authority is to ensure that there's some there for community broadcasting. They administer the licence allocations as well. So yeah, that's the regulatory authority. Now, as part of sort of the aims of the talks here, I understand that some of it is in regards to research into different sectors. The CBAA, in conjunction with their ingenuity, have over the last 10 years undertaken the National Listener Survey. So that's a survey of Australians aged over 15 plus across all states and territories to try and determine their listening habits. Surveys provided valuable feedback for community broadcasting stations about trends in the sector itself. This information is available on the CBAA website. It's a fantastic use for community broadcasting stations who want to use this information to be able to show their local communities the value of community broadcasting. The National Listener Survey has found that almost 5 million people listen to community radio every week, and that's a spread of people across sort of all facets of society. So that's almost 5 million means for 797,000 people listening. 84% of Australians aged 15 plus listen to some radio in the course of a typical week. 26% of all Australians listen to community radio. The numbers have risen since we first started doing the survey in earnest in 2004. It was about a million less than it is now, and there was a peak in 2013 with around 5 million. So there's obviously the highest number of people listening in metropolitan areas, and that is continuing to rise. Why do people listen to community radio? So the key reason for why people listen to community radio, 52% of those people surveyed, for local information and local news. Increasingly, commercial services in rural and regional areas will be network services from their city stations, such as Austerity and Southern Cross, which are the organisations that run Today and Novo, and stations like that. A lot of the other content for rural and regional commercial broadcasting services will be stuff that isn't local. It will be people going in there and they'll be able to record a 4-hour program in the space of an hour or so because they'll just come in and do talk breaks, and a computer will schedule all the songs and put in the talk breaks between those songs. It's sort of television programs like that because they never do time calls and then sort of say, hey, the traffic's really bad right now because we don't know what the traffic's like at that time. No, we don't do the weather or anything like that. So that's very important. So yeah, this is true, regardless of the background of the listener. Another reason for why people listen to community radio is specialist music programs. I consider this to be a really important part of the community radio sector. For quite some time now, community broadcasters have really been in a position where they've been able to set trends in regards to sort of the music that people are listening and sort of music that is considered cool, in other words. I think that's a really awesome thing. I am generally the oldest person at any gig that I go to, so to sort of have that involvement in community broadcasting goes some way to legitimising me doing so. So I think that's really important. As that, local voices and local personalities is very important. And of course, the audience between 15 and 24 really value that they play local Australian music on community radio. Pretty fast. For non-metro listeners, the local information and local news reason is a very high 66%, 2/3, and that is followed by understatements in regards to the importance of locality and broadcasting or local focus. And for metropolitan listeners, specialist music programs is 38%, and programs not available anywhere else. There is a station in Melbourne, sorry to cite Melbourne again as another example. Melbourne is arguably the epicentre of community broadcasting in the world. A station called 3CR, which has a lot of focus on women's issues, a lot of sort of very left-wing politics. There's even a program called Anarchist World this week, which surprisingly makes it to air at the same time every week. It's not just one of them. 95% of community radio listeners find these services to be tremendous value. Community broadcasting stations to fairly even spread across the nation, so 41% in regional areas, 34% in metropolitan and suburban, 25% in rural areas. Metropolitan and suburban from a Sydney point of view, the metropolitan stations would be ones sort of that are in the inner city, such as 2SER and FBI and Korea Radio, which is just down the road a little bit if you were to walk to Redfern Station from here. That's Korea Radio, and the suburban or sub-metro stations are ones such as 2RR and Ride, 2RR and Sutherland Shire, sort of all orbiting the greater Sydney area. A few statistics here, I don't know if they're very easy for you to see, it's just to sort of way here to sort of show that the listings of community broadcasting are very much reflected in the greater Australian population. So 2% of the Australian population makes up the Indigenous population. That's about the same for listeners for community radio. In the gay and lesbian section, just looking at that, we sort of have higher numbers there of people who identify as gay and lesbian who are engaging with community radio, but it's all sort of pretty even across all of that. In regards to other research undertaken by the Community Broadcasting Association of Australia is the station census. So this is instead of getting information from listeners of community broadcasting, this is where we report into the activities of stations and ask them what they're doing. So this is yielded results such as the number of volunteers who are engaged with community radio across Australia, what sort of roles they're undertaking there at the station, a split in regards to gender balance for people involved in the station, sort of how long they're being involved in the station for on a weekly basis, what sort of roles they're undertaking there at the station. So that's sort of really important research. It's not conducted as often as the National Listener Survey is, because it's sort of seen by the sectors that actually surveying the audience is probably a bit more crucial than surveying the internal workings of the sector. But it's still really important stuff to know who's out there creating community radio. So state community radio stations continue to broadcast specialist programs to diverse audience, and on community radio, more Australian music than ever before. As part of the Community Radio Broadcasting Codes of Practice, all community radio stations are required to play a minimum of 25% of Australian music every week in any given week. Many stations go above and beyond what is there. FBI here in Sydney pride themselves on 50% Australian music, and 25% of all music played is from Sydney. The sector is thriving with very little resources, very little money. As stated, the majority of people involved with community broadcasting stations are there in a voluntary capacity. Only a very small percentage actually gets paid for doing so, not paid very well. The majority of the community broadcasters, when you sort of break down how much money they're making, one of the favourite sayings within the sector is the smell of an oily rag, because a lot of the services they're offering, they're pretty much doing so with stations that where there's infrastructure put together with mandates. It's a lot of old equipment that they'll buy second-hand off the ABC or big operators like that. That's where they're sort of finding unique ways to ensure that there's musical content available, and they're just doing everything they can to ensure that their local communities are getting the best service possible with a little amount of money. In regards to other research available on the CBAA website is 3C Media. Now this is some studies put together by academics from all around Australia, and they will sort of look at trends in community radio. There's some really great information that's come out of that. I would suggest that we're sort of living in a time where gender balance in the arts is an issue that's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and community broadcasting has been very successful in ensuring that women have a strong and powerful voice. And one of the 3C Media sort of looks at and discusses why it's important and how community broadcasting is succeeding in that respect. So that is available on the CBAA website. I've got those links there. I can send them through the check, make them available to you guys. I can grab a business card and email you the stuff that we've discussed this evening. As well as research, I also have the understanding that you guys are sort of looking at policy and advocacy and what the different organisations who are currently speaking to you guys are doing. I had a bit of a chat to our policy and advocacy guy about this, and none of this has been made public, so congratulations, you're the main audience for all this information in this format. Digital radio, as we discussed. Digital radio, not just for community broadcasting, but for commercial broadcasting as well, is only available in 5 of the capital cities, and they're undergoing trials in Canberra and Darwin at the moment. And so the capacity for digital radio, we have to, CBAA and all community broadcasters have to ensure that community broadcasting is not left behind. Obviously, probably everyone's used to listening to radio on the FM band. Community broadcasting has the distinct feature that it was one of the first sort of few stations to engage with FM broadcasting when it was first introduced in Australia. Obviously, seeing as a lot of people cite that music is one of the most important reasons for one listening to community broadcasting, we want them to be able to listen to that music in the highest possible sound quality, and that's what makes digital radio so important. The CBAA is supporting community radio stations on digital radio through the Digital Radio Network. That's one of the partners of our organisation. We're ensuring that community radio participation is there in future rollouts and policy developments, because it is saying that digital radio will, at some stage in the future, be available all around Australia. Regional and rural station development is something that has been very important. The station census and just talking to people at rural and regional radio stations so that they struggle with organisational and operational capacity compared with metropolitan broadcasters. The community broadcasting, the signal that you get will go from the station to a transmitter tower to your radio. These transmitter towers are quite often on Crown land, and they're more often not owned by the big telecommunications companies. And the telecommunications companies are saying that they've sort of got the power here to charge rent for these things. And I've been talking to a couple of stations this week, and the rent that telco companies are wanting them to charge them for accessing their transmission towers exceeds what the station will make in a year, like a fairly wide margin. So it's really important that we assist these stations financially to ensure that they can stay on air. So we at CBAA continue to work with rural stations to identify the exact nature of support they require and funding for infrastructure report. The Australian Communications and Media Authority and the regulation of stations, there is an agenda to reduce the regulatory burden for businesses in their communities. The government at the moment has sort of engaged with a lot of hands-off policies. They would sort of like it if the operators of community broadcasting stations were able to do so without too much interference from the government, because all of the administration and bureaucracy that's involved is perceived as being a lot of time wasting. There's, I'd say, countless arguments that would be able to back that up. The danger of that is, of course, that if the government has a hands-off approach, that would probably leave the power in the hands of those who are financially stable, which community broadcasting stations more often not are. So it's kind of a very delicate balance there at the moment. So working with stations to understand and respond to their priorities for regulatory reform, we'll continue to do so. Spectrum management, as we discussed, in 2014, the government announced a review of spectrum policy. Spectrum is one of those things as people are more and more connected with all their various devices. How we use the spectrum and make the most of it is a very important thing. Community broadcasting, CBAA is, of course, working on behalf of community broadcasting to ensure that we always have in place frequency spectrum. And we continue to advocate media regulation. Now, this is one of the more contentious ones. The original wording for this, I softened it a little bit to make it a bit less left-leaning and socialist. Legislative changes in regards to national security reform have impacts on the practice of journalism in community radio and Australian media more broadly. As stated, we're living in a very, very interesting time for media, government regulation of media. Another example is, of course, a few weeks ago, Liberal politicians had been told that they were no longer to engage with the ABC television program Q&A, because they sort of said that they were just going there and being around for no reason whatsoever. Obviously, the ABC is something that is funded by the people of Australia. I guess it's sort of funded by the government, and the government is, of course, funded by the people of Australia. So that was sort of one of those really interesting situations where the government wasn't willing to engage with Q&A and have questions asked of how they were running the country, and instead chose to withdraw from that discussion altogether. Community broadcasting, because there's so many passionate individuals who are involved with it, and because they're not doing so from an interest where they're sort of trying to get themselves voted in, or because they have sort of financial interests that they want to look after. It's really important that the great journalism conducted by community broadcasters is one that is allowed to continue to thrive and grow. And there's, of course, been scares that with the legislative changes in regards to national security, if that's going to affect the way that journalists are able to go about their business. And so, of course, the CBAA is working with other stations, working with journalists, is working with other sector organisational bodies to ensure that Australia has a free and open media. Questions?